Hello. In this video, I want to talk about life needs versus survival needs. Going over Maslow's hierarchy of needs and going over the priorities of survival and how they kind of tie into each other and everything. So let's get further into this. All right, in psychology and stuff like that, Maslow has these 5 hierarchies of needs. And the bottom one is the starting pillar for it and everything. It deals with a lot of psychological or physiological needs and stuff like that. Dealing with stuff, they say air, water, food, sleep, shelter, and reproduction, which I don't necessarily agree with that. I'll throw something else in there later. But then we also have the priorities for survival, which deals with making sure that we have water, food, and shelter. And these things kind of come into play together as we go through our daily lives, and we don't always necessarily focus on it, but it is the basic building blocks for us to live as human beings. When we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we look at the building blocks for survival and everything, sometimes they have what they call the rule of threes for survival. And it fits the hierarchy of needs kind of on the bottom base level that they build on. It basically says you can only live 3 minutes without air, you only live 3 hours without proper shelter, you can only go 3 days without water, and you can only go 3 weeks without food. So that's the rule of threes they throw in there. And that kind of matches up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that's at the base level. And the rule of threes isn't necessarily an absolute. There's certain circumstances and stuff in it, but it's just a way to remember things. But the basic principles are that we all end up needing water to drink, we all end up needing food to eat, and we all end up needing shelter. Once those basic needs are met, we can grow from there. Air is something that we a lot of times take for granted. I know in the military and certain professions, you're going to have air being more available per se. When you fly on an airplane, they'll have oxygen masks that pop down. That could be a way of taking care of breathing. Scuba divers going underneath water. Firefighters having their self-contained breathing apparatuses. Soldiers having protective masks they wear. There are things you can do to help out with the breathing part, but normally we just say we have air, we breathe it, and that's fine. We don't have to worry about a resource of finding air. There could be emergencies where you have to do that, but normally we want to focus on the water, the food, and the shelter, and the priorities that we have for that. In our own living lives, normally we have drinkable water. Sometimes a boil water notice might come up or something like that. Sometimes water might shut down because of a water line break or something. So it's a good idea to have different plans on how to get yourself water so you don't find yourself in a situation where you're under stress, you're not able to take care of yourself and do things. Same thing for having food. Hopefully no one's ever been to the point where they're starving or they don't have enough to buy food and stuff like that, but that is reality with life sometimes. People don't have enough food. They don't have it stored, they don't have extra on hand, they don't have the finances to get it. Maybe they don't grow their own gardens and look at it as a high enough priority until they need to eat. So that's something to take care of. The shelter part, people live on the streets homeless. People live in cars sometimes. In the military, when I first joined, we slept outdoors. We didn't have, big tents or anything like that. Unless we're going to the National Training Center, that was the only time we set up these little pup tents that we had and everything. But other than that, sleeping bag, a poncho or something like that. You might get lucky to stay in certain areas, but a lot of times in the infantry at least, we'd go out for a week to a month and whatever supplies and stuff we brought with us, we had with us. Same thing going over to Iraq. When we went over to Iraq, bare minimum stuff we went over with, basically what we could carry on us. And we'd have 4 uniforms that would be our clothing. And that would have to last us along with maybe 7 or 8 t-shirts, socks, and underwear. But you had to rotate through that stuff and be smart about it. Sometimes you'd wear the same clothes for a week straight. You just had to make sure that you had enough to make things last and everything. But these basic needs, when they're met, are pretty simple to survive. A lot of stuff that we have today is luxury. And you don't necessarily have to have the most fancy things or anything like that. As you grow and build your base and you can afford more stuff, then by all means go after it. But we have to take care of that base, that first level, to make sure that our lives are properly functioning, whether it's in our day-to-day lives or whether it's in a natural disaster emergency type thing. So those are just things to take into consideration. One part of needs I think that often is not necessarily talked about, discussed about, or even something that the average person would put any thought into, but it comes into play. Once we hit those basic needs and we have the stuff that we need, whether we're a soldier deployed, whether we're responding to a disaster, whether we're caught in some kind of emergency type thing, but companionship is a huge part of that. If you've seen the movie with Tom Hanks, Castaway, in Castaway, that volleyball, Wilson, became a companion to him. It wasn't necessarily real, but it was there. When I joined the military as a soldier, inside the top of all of our Kevlars, we carried pictures of our families, our wives, and stuff like that inside there. And we were out, we'd pull them out and we'd look at those pictures and talk to them. It wasn't the real person. They weren't with us, but in our minds and in our feelings and thoughts, they were with us. And that's one of the things that drove us to do what we do when it's in hard times and stuff like that. Same thing goes for truck drivers, maybe having their family down on their visors and stuff like that, or even business executives that have their family portraits laid out on their desk and everything. But that companionship is what helps us out. There was a guy recently in Australia that got stranded out at sea for 3 months. 3 months, he basically didn't have the food, water, and stuff that you'd normally have, and he had to make do. He ended up catching rainwater and stuff like that, and he had a dog with him. It was just a man and his dog, and they ended up making do with that. When I was in the military, stationed in Korea, had this white little this dog called Snowball that we rescued from one of the dog farms where they ate dogs and stuff like that. Different culture, that's their way that they do things. But we had this little pet that we adopted and took with us and took care of us. Same thing, first deployment to Iraq, we had these 2 dogs that we adopted, Landmine and Digger, and they helped secure our area and they were friends to us. And as each one of us rotated off our guard points, we made sure that we took care of those dogs, and it kind of took your mind off the war and everything going on. An OIF 09 to 11 had another dog. Sadly, I can't remember his name. Maybe one of my friends will remember what the name of that dog was. But little things like pets and stuff like that mean a lot. Even going about doing stuff, you're a prisoner, whatever the case is, maybe you find a mouse or something like that and you give it a little bit of food and make it your friend. Those little companionships that you build up, those are things that help you in hard times. And if you're missing that, that can be one of those blocks that you need to fill. Some companions will be different than other companions. Oscar here's a bearded dragon. Oscar doesn't have a lot of emotions and stuff like that, but something to take care of and something that can pass the time and give you stuff to think about. Most people usually have a dog, a cat, or something like that as a companion, but it is one of those things that some people need in their lives. So if you feel like you're missing something, or maybe something's not right that's there between your basic stuff, having air to breathe, having the water that you drink, the food that you eat, and the shelter over your head, that companion can be something that helps complete it and everything. I happen to have dogs in my house, and Oscar's a guest visiting right now, belongs to my wife and stays at her school classroom. Summertime's out, so about to say goodbye to Oscar and let him go back to the classroom. But I just wanted to go over this just to get your mind thinking and give yourself some ideas and stuff to think about if maybe you're missing something, or maybe you've never heard these things before. Hope you enjoyed this. Do me a favor if you would, hit that like button. Subscribe to my channel if you would. Cav Cop out. Oscar says subscribe to Cav Cop. Oscar wants to know why you're not subscribed to Cav Cop. You don't want to make Oscar mad.